Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Sutta study session here with Empty Cloud Monastery. So today I'll be going over some of the Karaniya Metta Sutta, so carrying on with the theme of metta practice. So the Karaniya Metta Sutta is one of the most well-known discourses from the Pali Canon. And it's very commonly recited in Buddhist monasteries. It's also a sutta which is very commonly memorized by, definitely by monks. Most Buddhist monks have some version of the Karaniya Metta Sutta memorized, but it's also very commonly memorized by lay people as well. So this is one of the really well-loved, well-cherished discourses from the Buddha. It's also very commonly used as a parita chant, so a chant of protection, a chant of blessings. And it's also very practical. So this discourse gives some very practical guidance for practicing metta. But coming at it through, in some cases, a somewhat surprising angle. Again, I'll be probably today and tomorrow, I'll be going through this discourse and talking about it word by word, going over some of the particular nuances of this text. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddhas. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the Karaniya Metta Sutta, it's from the Khuddaka Nikaya, so the collection of minor discourses, which is also where we get things like the Dhammapada, the Sutta Nipata, the Therigatha. So the Khuddaka Nikaya is mostly composed of poetry, and Pali poetry is primarily metric. So its poetic form is mostly in the timing and rhythm of the syllables. So it's not concerned with rhyme in the sense that we normally think of poetry, but rather it has to do with the timing of each syllable and how that altogether creates a particular rhythm. So Pali poetry is something which is meant to be recited out loud. And it's when it's recited out loud that one understands the poetic quality of it. And like all poetry, something is lost in translation. So whenever translating anything, something always gets lost in translation. But this is especially true of poetry, because poetry of any form relies upon selecting words not just for their meaning, but for their particular artistic or aesthetic quality, which then creates a composition which is not just meaningful, but also has an artistic flair to it. And it's difficult enough to maintain the correct meaning when translating something. It's even more difficult to maintain the artistic flair of the original text when translating. And it's nearly impossible to preserve both the meaning and the artistry. So keep that in mind whenever reading any translation of a poetic text. So again, the Karaniya Metta Sutta is an example. It's all Pali poetry. Dhammapada is another example. It's all poetry. There's many others throughout the suttas. So these are things which are meant to be read in Pali, and they don't really come across very well in any other language. So again, I'll start going through the Karaniya Metta Sutta, and again, here we're emphasizing the meaning of the words. So I won't be going much into the poetic structure of it because that's not really relevant to the Dhamma. But it is part of why these are such pleasant things to chant. It's because they're meant to be chanted. They're meant to be recited out loud. So the Karaniya Metta Sutta, again, it's from the Khuddaka Nikaya, and it appears a couple places in the Khuddaka Nikaya. The more well-known one is from the Khuddaka Pata, the first book of the Khuddaka Nikaya. So the text begins. So it starts off with the phrase Karniya Mata Kusalena Yantang Santang Padanga Bisamecha. So Karaniyang means this is what should be done or what is to be done. Atta Kusalena. So the word atta has the meaning of purpose or benefit or goal. Can also mean meaning, as in the meaning of a word. But usually when we say atta, we mean benefit or goal. So if you say something is beneficial, then you would use the word atta in Pali. And also the word atta is used to refer to the final goal of Buddhist practice. So the highest benefit, the highest purpose, which is awakening. So complete freedom from dukkha. So atta kusalena. Kusala usually has the meaning of wholesome, in the sense of something that's morally good, something that leads the mind towards awakening. But the word kusala also is occasionally used to mean skillful, someone who is skilled at something, who's competent or proficient at something. So atta kusalena means by a person who is proficient in the goal, or who is competent in understanding what's beneficial. So this is talking about somebody who is already embarked upon the Buddhist path and already has some at least basic understanding of what is right and what is wrong, of what is helpful for attaining awakening and what is not helpful or counterproductive. So this is somebody who already has some basic understanding of what Buddhism is about, some basic understanding of what's good and bad, of what produces wisdom, what leads towards progress on the path, as opposed to what causes backsliding. And some people think that this is specifically talking about stream enterers. I don't have that viewpoint, because then that would seem to imply that the Buddha is saying that only stream enterers should practice metta. And that's definitely not what we see anywhere else in the suttas. In fact, the Buddha encourages metta for everyone, regardless of what stage of the path they're on. But this is emphasizing, like, especially if you've already got some sense of Buddhist practice and you've already started training your mind and cultivating the qualities of awakening, then you should really think about taking on the advice that the Buddha is giving in this discourse. Then the next phrase, yantang santang padang abhisamecha. So santang padang, santang means peace. It has several meanings. It can mean peaceful, it can mean true, and it can mean good. And then the word padang, again, has a few different meanings, but here its meaning as path. So santang padang is the peaceful path, the true path, the good path. And abhisamecha, this means one who has arrived at. So one who has arrived at the good path, the path of peace, the path of truth, the true path, the good path, the peaceful path. So again, it's saying someone who's committed to practicing Buddhism. And again, people sometimes say that this is referring only to stream enterers, but as I said a moment ago, that's not my take on this, but rather it's talking about anybody who's decided that they're sincerely committed to practicing Buddhism. So then the Buddha starts going into his advice for someone who's committed to practicing the path and cultivating the way to awakening. So the first recommendation he makes is that one should be sakko. So sakko is a word that its main meaning is competent or capable. But it also has a meaning of truthful or honest. But the main point here is someone who is capable of practicing the Buddha's teachings, someone who has some ability or capacity in practicing the Buddha's teachings, which then is followed up with the next two words. So uju and suhuju. So uju literally means upright or direct or straightforward. But usually in Buddhism, it has the sense of being morally upright. So having a good sense of morality, a good sense of what is proper, and a commitment to doing what is right. So the word uju, by the way, this is also when we say to sit up straight, which you see in, for example, the Anapanasati suttas, the Satipatthana sutta. It's the same word uju. So like ujung kayang pane dehitva. So having put the body uju. So the body should be upright. So in the same way, we have an upright mind. So we should try to have a mind which is has the confidence of knowing we're doing what's morally right. And so that's the word uju. And the next word is suhuju, which just means very upright. So the Buddha is like not just like a little bit upright, not just a little bit moral, but very upright. So very committed to moral integrity. And the next quality that the Buddha recommends is, in Pali, it's suvacho. So suvacho, it's from the word vacha, which means speech, or and the prefix su, which means good or easy. So at first glance, one might think that the word suvacho means having good speech, but actually what it means is being easy to speak to. So suvacho means being easy to speak to. And elsewhere in the suttas, this term is used particularly to mean being easy to correct. So someone who takes admonishment easily, who receives instruction easily. So if you've ever been in the position of needing to give constructive criticism or needing to correct someone, and you go and you try to talk to them, and they're just really hard to talk to. Like they're not interested in hearing your advice. They're not interested in listening to your criticism. They're not interested in receiving your instructions. So that's someone who's hard to speak to. But then somebody else, you go and you say like, well, actually what you did was not right. It'd be better if you did it this other way. And the person is like, oh, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I'll try to do better next time. Well, someone like that is easy to speak to. So this is a quality that the Buddha really encouraged us to develop the quality of being easy to speak to, easy to correct, easy to instruct. Because somebody who is offering us instruction, they're giving us support on the path to awakening. They're trying to help us get better. And it's not always something we want to hear. Sometimes the person is actually giving us instruction or advice which is uncomfortable to us. Maybe they're telling us like, oh, I know you like having wine with dinner, but you really should stop drinking wine. I don't care what the doctors say. You should stop drinking wine. And actually, if your doctor's telling you to drink wine, then you need to go to a different doctor. I don't trust that kind of doctor. So, but maybe you're really attached to having wine with dinner and you really don't want to get this kind of instruction. But it's important to recognize that it's our own attachment which is making it difficult to receive that advice. The advice itself is just straight from the Buddha. This is what the Buddha said. The Buddha said not to drink alcohol. So the person who's reminding us of what the Buddha said, they're doing us a favor. So we should be happy to receive that. For example, there's a very famous Dhammapada verse where the Buddha says, see someone who points out your faults as a guide to hidden treasure. So again, somebody who's willing to point out our shortcomings to us. We should cherish that kind of person. We should love that kind of person. We should be delighted because they're helping to show us how we can become better people. If you just go around pretending that nothing's wrong with you, I'm already perfect, I don't need any instructions. If we go around with that kind of attitude, then our progress on the path will be extremely slow. But if we're open to receiving an instruction and advice from others, then we can progress much more quickly. So this is a very important quality in Buddhist practice. So especially in monastic life, this is something that we put a huge emphasis on, being open to admonishment and instruction from others. But anyone who's practicing Buddhism, this is an important quality. And the next quality on this list is mudu. So the word mudu literally means soft, but it has the meaning here of being gentle. So soft in how we relate to others. So having a gentleness, a softness in our interactions with people. And again, this is not always easy, especially for those of us who are hate types. Gentleness is actually really difficult. It takes a lot of effort. But it's something which is very important. If we want to cultivate the path of goodness, then everything we do should be good karma. Everything we do should be wholesome. Everything we do should be kind and gentle. And this also is directly related to practicing metta. This is something else to keep in mind, is that everything the Buddha is listing here is forms of behavior which help us to practice metta. So for example, if we're gentle with others, if we speak gently, if we act gently towards others as well as towards ourselves, then that gentleness naturally helps the mind of metta to arise. So the mind of metta is a mind of gentleness. So practicing gentleness helps to produce metta. These two qualities go together. So the next one that's on the list is anatimani. So similarly, this means not being conceited. So atimana, so mana means conceit, self-concept, the idea of me. It's actually related to the word which means to conceptualize something. So our mana is our concept of self, our concept of me. And the prefix ati means excessive, over. So atimana is you have an excessive self-concept. So you're way too caught up in yourself, way too focused on me. So everyone who's not fully enlightened has some degree of mana, some degree of self-obsession, because that's what distinguishes an awakened being from an unawakened being. An awakened being has no conceit at all. They have no concept of self. Whereas ordinary unawakened beings, namely the rest of us, we have some degree of self-identity, some degree of attachment to who we think we are. But we particularly want to try to stay away from atimani. So atimana is like excessive conceit, excessive obsession with self. So this is more when we say in English, we say like, oh, that person is really conceited. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about atimana, this excessive obsession with self. So we accept, for the most part, we accept that everyone is to some degree self-obsessed, because that's normal. It's not good. In fact, it's bad, but it's normal. But it's this excessive obsession with self that even non-Buddhist people recognize as something that's really annoying and not pleasant to be around. So trying to at least reduce our conceit a little bit, trying to reduce our self-obsession. And it's important to point out when we talk about reducing our conceit, this does not mean then going into the opposite, which is having an attitude of inferiority. So the Buddha said that there's 3 kinds of conceit. So there's the conceit of superiority, the conceit I am better than others. And that's what we normally think of when we say the word conceit in English. We normally mean someone who has the conceit of superiority, the conceit I am better. But the Buddha said there's also 2 other kinds of conceit. There's the conceit I am worse, I am inferior, and the conceit I am equal. So the 3 kinds of conceit: the conceit of superiority, the conceit of inferiority, and the conceit of equality. So again, normally we think about the conceit of superiority, thinking I am better than others. And we can all recognize that that's pretty annoying and unwholesome and not helpful. The conceit of inferiority is also quite interesting. So this is people who have a unrealistically low opinion of themselves. They think that they're a bad person when they're really not such a bad person, or they think that they're unskillful at everything when actually they can do some things at least moderately well, or they think that they're completely useless when actually they're really not. They're not really that different from everybody else. So this also is a rather annoying form of self-obsession. So the conceit of inferiority. In fact, some people find the conceit of inferiority even more infuriating than the conceit of superiority. It's almost, at times, it's almost nicer to be around people who think they're the greatest thing on the earth than to be around people who are constantly hating themselves. But of course, the Buddha said either one of these is just another form of self-centeredness. And either one is therefore something we should let go of. And the conceit of equality. This is often the most difficult one for people to understand, especially here in America. In America, we have a very strong cultural belief in equality. In theory, anyway. In actuality, we don't. But in theory, we have a deep belief in equality. But once again, what is that coming from? That's coming from a sense of self. Oh, I am equal to others. How dare you put me above or below others? We're all equal. And this can even lead to the point of people rejecting authority or rejecting expertise, which actually is a pervasive problem in this particular culture. Like you have somebody who's studied a subject for many, many, many years. So maybe someone who's been a monk for many, many years and very familiar with Buddhism, or maybe a scientist who's been studying medicine or physics or whatever for many, many, many years. So someone who actually is an expert in a field. Then you have some other random person who reads one book on the topic and says, well, I am equal to everybody else. Therefore, my opinion is equally important. It's like, well, no, it's not. It's not. It's not equally important. There actually is a difference between an expert in a topic and a beginner in a topic. There actually is a difference between somebody who is at an advanced level and someone who's at a beginner level. They're not the same. They're not equal. So to have the conceit of equality also can be quite infuriating to other people. But again, the common thread through all 3 of these forms of conceit is that they're all based upon some form of self-obsession, some fixation on me and mine. And as long as we're fixated on me, then it's very difficult to practice metta. As long as we're fixated on myself and who I am and my self-identity and how I compare to others, as long as we're fixated on ourselves, then it's very difficult to want others to be happy. The next quality that the Buddha recommends for someone who wants to practice metta. The next quality is santusika, which is also the name of a really wonderful bhikkhuni that I know who lives in California. So she got a great name. Santusika means content. It's actually related to the word tusita. So you might have heard of the heaven realm called tusita. So tusita is the heaven of the contented devas. So santusika means completely content. The prefix sang means complete. Santusika means completely content. So contentment is another extremely important part of Buddha's practice. Because when we're content with the way things are right now, then we're not producing greed or desire, which means we're not producing dukkha. And when we're content with the way things are now, we're also not producing aversion. So we're not producing dosa or patigha, vyapada. So contentment is actually very close to equanimity. Contentment is very close to awakening. Contentment also is something that we practice through renunciation. Because renunciation is when you let go of wanting something other than what you currently have. And renunciation can even mean letting go of what you currently have, recognizing that you don't even need what you currently have. You can be content with absolutely nothing, content with nothing at all. So when you're completely content, then you're not always trying to manipulate your surroundings to get what you want. You're not always trying to seek out anything in particular to make you more comfortable or more pleasant. And therefore, then you can relate to other people from a position of sincere goodwill, of sincere benevolence. Because you're not relating to other people as tools to gain pleasure for yourself, but rather you can relate to people as they are, which is another suffering being who wants to be happy and is seeking the path to awakening. The next quality on the list is, in Pali, it's subaro. And I find this word really cute. So the word bara means a burden. So like if you're carrying a heavy object on your shoulders, that's your bara, your burden. So a subara is an easy burden. So the Buddha is saying, be an easy burden. In other words, don't be a huge hassle to the people around you. Don't be high maintenance. Try to be low maintenance. Someone who's easy to get along with, easy to support, easy to be around, easy to help. So you want to be low maintenance rather than high maintenance. An easy burden, not a difficult burden. This is especially important for monks. Since we rely on the generosity of others, it's important for us to be as easy to support as possible. We don't want to make things too difficult for the people who are trying to help us. But this is also true for everyone. So for lay people as well, we always want to ask ourselves, am I being too much of a burden to others? Is there a way that I can be more low maintenance? A little bit easier for other people to get along with, easier for other people to be around, and easier for others to help. So this also is a practice of metta, because it's considering, how am I presenting myself to others? Am I presenting myself to others in a way that's causing inconvenience for them, a way that's burdensome to them? So a mind of metta then wants to make life easier for other people. So naturally we want to be low maintenance, easy to look after. And the next quality is appakicca. So the word kicca means duty, responsibility, something that you need to do. And the word appa means few or little. So appakicca means having few duties, few responsibilities, little that you have to do. This also is important because when we have a lot of duties and a lot of responsibilities and a lot of things that we need to worry about, a lot of things that we need to take care of, then we tend to be very preoccupied and caught up. and all the things that we have to do and have to keep track of and have to worry about. And then we get very stressed out and very anxious, and we're very fixated on me and my problems and my duties. And then we just don't have a lot of space to care about other people. We're so fixated on all of our duties and responsibilities and worries and cares and concerns that it's difficult for us to muster up the mental and emotional space to care about others. So here the Buddha is trying to encourage us to live a simple life, a not too busy life. Live a life which is pretty quiet and peaceful, not too complicated, not too messy, not too many things you need to worry about. Of course, everyone has a little bit of duty, a little bit of responsibilities, some tasks, that's normal. But try to keep it to a minimum so that you have a sense of spaciousness in your life. Then that spaciousness then gives you the room to embrace other people. And the next quality in Pali is sallahuka. So lahuka means lightweight. And vutti means how you live, how you behave. So this means having a minimalist lifestyle. So this is the opposite of opulence or decadence. So an opulent life is where you always want lots of stuff, and it's got to be really great stuff. You always want lots of really nice stuff, and you always want to do lots of really wonderful activities all the time. So again, this is that greedy mind, which is like, I want more stuff, and I want great stuff, and I want the best stuff, and I want to do the most fun things, and I want to do it now, and I want to do it over and over again. This mind which wants a very grandiose, over-the-top, maximized life. And again, this is coming from a place of self-centeredness. This grasping mind which wants more for me, which wants the best for me, wants the maximum for me. So instead, the Buddha is encouraging to live a minimal lifestyle. So have just what you need. Don't try to get more than what you really need. Live a simple life, a quiet life, a peaceful life. Don't constantly be seeking out new, exciting things. Don't constantly be seeking out the top luxuries in life. I still remember a few months ago, someone came to the monastery, and they were having some problems in their life. So they were asking me about the problems they were having, and I was talking to this person. And then afterwards, Ayasoma, who used to work in fashion, Ayasoma turns to me and she says, "Do you realize that person was wearing $2,000 sandals?" And I was just blown away. I was like, $2,000 for a pair of sandals. Like, to me, they just looked like sandals. They just looked perfectly normal sandals to me. But since Ayasoma used to work in fashion, she knows what's what. So she took one look and she knew that that woman's got $2,000 on her feet. And I was just blown away. How bloody ridiculous can you get? I mean, I'm embarrassed at how much my sandals cost. And they're nowhere near that. I mean, and what kind of a deranged mind spends $2,000 on a pair of sandals? I don't even know what to say about that. So that's the exact opposite of Salahukavuti. That's the exact opposite of a minimalist lifestyle. That's someone who's going for opulence. That's someone who's going for an over-the-top lifestyle. So let's try to go for the opposite, very simple, minimal life. So you don't need to seek out the top luxuries. And you definitely don't need to spend $2,000 on sandals. I mean, seriously. So there's still quite a bit left to the Metta Sutta. So at this rate, it's going to take me several sessions to get through everything. So I think at this time, I will go ahead and pause, and I'll take whatever questions there might be. So questions either from the people online or the residents here at the monastery. So first off, hello to everyone who's joining in. So hello to Kauser Friend, Yankee, Jayanta, Maria, Mike, Niranjan, Amaranta, Michael, Sud, Metta Studio. There's a name here in Thai, which I can't read, but hello to Thai person. So always lovely to see more Thai friends joining in. Hello to Bobby. There's also an anonymous Facebook user. So hello to anonymous Facebook user and to Prashant. And I see one question from online. So Bobby asks, what's the middle way in superiority, inferiority, and equality conceit? Would it be no self and just let our personalities play themselves out with awareness? So we're trying not to have any conceit at all. So not to compare yourself to others. So not to think I am better than others, or I am worse than others, or I am equal to others. All of those are forms of comparing yourself to other people. Like I am this compared to others. So just don't get into comparing yourself to others. So rather than asking, am I better than others? Am I worse than others? Am I equal to others? Instead, you should be asking, how can I become more like the Buddha? That's what you should be asking yourself. How can I be more like the Buddha? That's the only important question to ask. It doesn't matter whether you're better or worse than others. It's actually beside the point. It's completely irrelevant. What's important is that you're not yet fully awakened. That's what's important. That's what you should be working on. So yeah, the problem with the three forms of conceit is that all of them are coming from a place of self-centeredness and of comparing oneself to others. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with what's really important is, are we progressing towards awakening? That's what's really important. So Bobby seems to have been a little bit upset by the sandal story. So Bobby says, is it superiority conceit to judge someone on the sandals they're wearing instead of minding your own business? So that's slightly rude, but I'm going to answer your question anyway. The answer is no, it's not. It's just sharing the Buddha's teachings. That's all. So rather, you might ask yourself, why did that upset you? What was the problem there? Yeah, we all start where we are. So some people, their problem is that actually they are really obsessed with opulence. They're really obsessed with having fancy things. They're really obsessed with showing off their wealth. Some people, that's a problem that they're working with. And if that's the problem that they're working with, then that's what they need to work on. That's what they need to try to address. Some people, they actually go to the opposite extreme. They're trying to put on a show of humility to the point where, actually, I remember one time somebody asked me, like, what kind of razor blades do you use? And I told him what kind of razor blades I use. And he was like, ha, I use cheap, disposable, single blade razors. And I'm just like, congratulations. It's like, this person had this sense that he was superior to me because he used cheaper razor blades than me. And I was like, okay, as you wish. So that's also a problem. Like some people get this idea of like, I am better than others because I use cheaper things than others. But that's also missing the point. The point is what's necessary. And the reason I bring up that story is because is it really necessary to wear $2,000 sandals? No, it's not. You could wear $100 sandals and donate the other $1,900 to charity. That would be much better. Do you realize how many people you can feed with $1,900? It's a lot of people.
What if he has millions and he were 2,000 and then he donate 1,999,000 whatever minus 2,000?
Well, that's so great. So it's also good to appreciate what people do. Sometimes we fixate on what people aren't doing, and we miss out on what they actually are doing. So it is good. It's good to appreciate the good things that people do. And actually, we shouldn't be judging other people. So I bring up the sandal story, not because of any judgment. I mean, I don't think any less of that person, because I also know that this is a person who, from time to time, they come to the monastery and they support the temple, and they're making some effort to practice Buddhism. So they are cultivating qualities which lead in the direction of awakening. But I mention this story because of this deep shock that somebody would spend so much money for something to put on your feet.
Right.
Like it was like literally shocking to me. I mean, I always knew that there was such a thing, that there are massively overpriced sandals in the world.
Right.
But actually, like, to see it with my own eyes was pretty mind-blowing. And yeah, I asked myself, would the Buddha do something like that?
No,
It's like, of course he would.
Everything.
Yeah, well, the Buddha, and he would wear sandals. It's actually in the Vinaya that we're allowed to wear sandals. But would the Buddha wear $2,000 sandals? No, he wouldn't. Yeah. So this person, so Paul says, in order to find kindness for others, it seems we need to acknowledge the sentience of others. What is the difference between sentience and Atman? So the difference is that sentience is impermanent. It's constantly changing. It arises and ceases. It's conditional. Whereas Atman, the self or the soul, is something which is defined as that which does not change, that which is permanent, that which is stable, that which is one's ultimate true self. So the Buddha taught the teaching of anatman, the idea that there is nothing you can find anywhere which is permanent, lasting, stable, one's true self. So sentience is something which is conditional. It arises and ceases. It's impermanent. Therefore, it's not our true self. Sud asks, is the good path here referring to the Eightfold Path? Yes, that's correct. Yep. Go ahead.
I think I understand the three conceits theoretically. In terms of application, I'm still a little confused on what the Buddha path would be. So for example, I think you hinted at it, the contentious topic of the vaccines, for example. I find myself staunchly in the superiority conceit, and sometimes the equality conceit. What would be a better path towards it? Using that just as an example.
Just don't compare yourself to others. So if you think I am better than others or I am equal to others, that's still coming from a place of self-identity. So you're identifying yourself as something. Anytime you start a sentence with I am, you're already on the wrong track. From a Buddhist standpoint, it's always coming from a place of self-identity, self-centeredness. So you brought up the case of vaccines. Well, I chose to get vaccinated, and the main reason I did so was because I don't want to make other people sick. So that's coming from a place of compassion. That's a good motivation for something. So if you then start thinking ill of other people, well, that's not compassion anymore. That's getting into hostility. It's getting into aversion. You could try having compassion for people. You can reflect what are the conditions that lead to people being opposed to vaccination, for example. There's actually a lot of things that contribute to it. One of the things that contributes to it is the extremely messed up healthcare system we have in this country, which leads to people not trusting doctors, not trusting medical expertise. So it's actually not surprising that then some people wouldn't trust what medical experts say about vaccines. Also reflecting on the cultural condition in this country. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a very strong emphasis on this idea that everybody has an equal right to their own opinion. But that's actually really dangerous when it comes to things like science. It's like, well, my opinion is that the moon is made out of cheese. Well, that's a nice opinion, but it's wrong. Well, my opinion is that the earth is flat. It's like, well, nice opinion, still wrong. So it's actually a big problem. But you can see that it has a root in the cultural conditions that we have. So that can be a way of helping to produce compassion. It's like, oh, their opinions and viewpoints are coming from their conditions, just as mine are coming from my conditions. So are my conditions superior to theirs? Well, from one perspective, perhaps. From another perspective, perhaps not. Am I inherently superior to other people? Well, actually, it depends upon your standard of judgment. Like hair color. Some people would say that black hair is inherently superior. Others will say it's inherently inferior. What is it actually? Actually, it's nothing. It's just hair. It's not inherently better or worse. It's just hair. It all depends upon your perspective, whether it's better or worse. It depends upon your value judgments, whether it's better or worse. So ultimately, from a Buddhist standpoint, what we're really concerned about is what leads towards awakening. And in ourselves, what leads towards awakening is compassion for others, rather than hostility or aversion towards others. Yeah, and you can get into thinking like, well, I'm a better Buddhist than other people. But the moment you start thinking that way, you actually decrease your own Buddhishness a little bit. So the important thing is actually just constantly moving ourselves towards the goal, not worrying so much what other people are doing. Also in the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, don't focus on what other people do or don't do. Instead, focus on what you yourself do or don't do. So similarly, not to get too caught up in other people's conduct, because it's none of our business. Looking at other people can be a way of understanding our own mind. So, for example, if you look at somebody else's ridiculously opulent sandals and you start thinking like, oh yeah, I want some of those. Well, that's a little glimpse at your own mind. A little glimpse that there's a problem in your own mind. But not to start thinking like, oh, that person is a bad person, and it's now my right to hate that person because they wear expensive sandals. That's also not right. Yes.
Follow-up question.
Go ahead.
A little off topic though. So I understand the openness part of it, that you don't want to trigger your own greed. But what if you see something that you appreciate, that inspires you, and you want to have more of it? Say someone who's really healthy looking, very fit, and you're like, I want more of that too in my life. Is that considered greed?
Well, again, it depends on your motivation. So physical health in and of itself is not particularly relevant to the path of awakening. It's indirectly relevant. So for example, part of our meal contemplation is to eat in a way that supports our health. And also in the suttas, the Buddha does mention that having good physical health is a support to the path. So having good health is kind of indirectly related to Buddhism. It's not directly related, but it's indirectly related. But also in that case, like if you're looking at a particular quality, so for example, you see somebody else who's really kind, and you're like, oh, I want to be really kind like that person. Well, what you're appreciating is the quality of kindness, and you're making the aspiration to be kind. So that doesn't have anything to do with conceit. But if you think like, oh, that person is better than me, I am inferior to that person. Well, that's getting into a bit of a problem. That's when you're getting into the 3 conceits. If you're thinking like, I'm not as good as that person, look how kind they are, I'm not as kind as they are, I can never be as kind as them, I'm so much worse than them. Well, that's just another self-centered rant in your mind, that's all. That's not helpful. But if you look at the person and you're like, wow, look how kind they are, I want to be kind like that person. That's actually really good, because that's the aspiration to develop a wholesome quality. And you can do that without getting into the whole conceit of inferiority. Okay. So Prashant asks, how can we overcome all defilement and develop metta? Last night I gave some instructions on practicing metta meditation. And here in the sutta, the Buddha gives a lot of advice on how to practice in your everyday life to help support the development of metta. So just keep listening to these talks and you'll get the instructions. Michael says, the sandal story turned my mind to my own fancy things, singing bowls, fountain pens, books. I need help ridding myself of stuff. So there's a really great way of doing this. Actually, there's 2 ways. There's one way which is a bit faster, but a little bit less nice. And another way which is a bit slower, but a bit nicer. So the fast way is to get a big garbage can and dump all the extra stuff in the big garbage can and then put it out by the curb. And then the next day, you'll have less stuff and you'll feel a lot better. That's the fast way. The way that's a bit slower but a bit nicer is to give away a lot of your extra stuff to people who will like it or appreciate it. That's a bit nicer, because then the first way you're just practicing renunciation. The second way you're practicing both renunciation and generosity. So the second way is a bit better, but it's slower and requires a bit more effort. But yeah, really start going through your stuff and really sincerely asking yourself, do I really need to keep this? And you'll find most of it you don't. So my own practice is I try not to own more than what I can carry by myself in one trip. I'm also a monk though, so I admit my standards are a bit higher than most people. Another really helpful one, Ajahn Jayasaro once said, you should be able to pack all your things and be ready to go in 5 minutes. I'm actually not to that standard. It takes me about 15 minutes. But still, that's standard. Can you pack all your stuff and be ready to go in a few minutes?
No, took me half a night before I came here.
You just throw some stuff in the duffel bag and you're ready to go. What's the big deal? And Michael asks, if the sandals make her happy, would sympathetic joy be appropriate? Actually, yeah. Yeah, you can appreciate the happiness of other people, but recognize that it's not the sandals that's making the person happy. Rather, she's deciding to be happy. And she thinks it's because of the sandals, but actually it's because she chose to be happy. And you can do that without fancy sandals. But yeah, it's always good to appreciate other people's happiness. That's one of the Brahma Viharas. That's one way of practicing with the Brahma Viharas. AS asks, is this all a process of unburdening ourselves of inner and outer excess, thoughts and possessions? Yeah, that's one aspect of it. It's a practice of letting go, both inside and outside, letting go. Yeah. And Sud asks, is it important to renounce our preferences, at least mentally, for one to practice metta easily? It helps. There's actually a very famous a Chinese poem from the Chan tradition called the Xin Xin Ming. You're familiar with it? You should read it. It's about 1 page long, so it's not very long. And I can actually never remember much more than the first couple of lines, but the first line itself is really important. The first line says, the way is easy for one who has no preferences. This is talking about Buddhist practice. So Buddhist practice is easy for one who has no preferences. So the more preferences you have, the harder your life is, and the harder it is to make progress in Buddhism. The fewer preferences you have, the easier it gets. And that also applies to metta, of course. Wow, this is getting a lot of questions. I'm kind of surprised. You have another one?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Stuff I understand. I just don't so much understand experience part of it.
What do you mean?
For maximize experience and maximize your life is also considered not good.
Well, again, the question is why? So are we just trying to accumulate experiences just for the fun of it? Or are we trying to accumulate experiences because we think it will help us develop wisdom? So for example, if you're just like, well, I really want to go and see Machu Picchu just because I've never seen it and I've heard it's great. Well, why? It's just some stones on a mountain somewhere. Who cares? But if you go there because you want to have a deeper understanding of how people generate their own suffering and how to become free of suffering, well, that's a good reason. I'm not actually sure that visiting Machu Picchu will help you do that. But if that was your actual motivation for going there, that's fine. But otherwise, yeah, if you're just trying to collect experiences just because you want to collect experiences, yeah, I'm not actually convinced that leads towards awakening. That just seems like running around in circles in samsara. We've been doing that for countless lifetimes. We don't really need to do more of that. So, and it's not evil in the way that like torturing kittens is evil. But is it productive? Not really. Maybe a little tiny bit. Just generally speaking, world travel does tend to make people a little more tolerant of other people. As you start to appreciate the differences between different cultures and different countries, and you also start to get some deeper understanding of your own cultural conditioning. Like a couple years ago, I spent 2 months in Taiwan, and I became deeply, deeply aware of how American I was, like painfully aware of how American I was. I always knew I was American. I grew up here. It's kind of hard to escape the fact that I'm American. But being in a completely different culture, where I was the only American surrounded by people from an entirely different cultural mindset, it helped me actually introspect, like look inside my own mind and see some of the parts of myself that I'd always overlooked because I was surrounded with people who had a similar internal conditioning. So to some degree, I do think that world travel can help one develop a certain degree of introspection and tolerance. But as far as just gathering experiences, just for the sake of gathering experiences, yeah, I'm not convinced that's particularly helpful. And again, look at your motives. Why are you doing it? Yeah, all too often it actually is just greed. It's just wanting more experiences, which is not dramatically different from wanting more things. It's just mental acquisitions as opposed to physical acquisitions. But ultimately, everything is mind. So also, your physical acquisitions are technically in your mind. You think you own something, but actually it's a mental object. So whether the mental object is an experience or a physical object is beside the point. It's just an acquisition. It's a possession. It's like, so now you possess a memory of having gone to Machu Picchu. It's like, okay. And does that bring you closer to awakening? This is ultimately the question. In Buddhism, we should always be asking ourselves, does this lead towards awakening? That's the important question. Okay. So Paul says, can you please explain how to balance sense restraint and development of samadhi on the one hand, and acknowledging the sentience in the world on the other? I am concerned that I can dissociate with others when practicing and therefore make their sentience not important. Well, when you're sitting in meditation, so when you're in the meditation hall with your eyes closed and focusing on samadhi, then you don't need to be concerned with the existence of other people. You can just focus on practicing samadhi. But the moment you come out of your meditation, then you start interacting with other people, and you have to acknowledge that they're sentient beings, and you have to be considerate, you have to be gentle, you have to be kind. So that's the balance right there. When you're in meditation practicing samadhi, then your only focus is on practicing samadhi. But when you're doing anything whatsoever which involves interacting with other people, then your practice is metta. Okay. Jayanta asks, how if she associate with rich people, keep up with society? I assume this is about the sandal story. Wow, the sandal story really struck people strongly. I guess I'm used to dealing with monks, but people who understand that $2,000 sandals are over the top. Anyway, if you're spending time with the sort of people who will only appreciate you if your sandals cost $2,000, you need to make some new friends. Because your current friends are pretty darn shallow. That's all. This person says, Prashant asks, how can we follow Panchasila without breaking it? Though we decide to not break it, but we keep breaking it either way. 5 precepts are really not difficult. And just for the record, I have 227 precepts. And that's the major ones. There's another 10,000 or so minor ones. And y'all can't keep 5? Are you serious? Anyway, so yeah, you make the resolution to not to follow the 5 precepts. And when you screw up, then actually what the Buddha recommends is to go to your teacher, confess your mistake, and vow to do better. That's actually what we do in monastic life. When we break a precept, then we go to another monk and we confess that we broke a precept, and we say that we're going to try to do better. We're going to try not to do it again. So the Buddha actually recommends the same thing for everyone, for lay people as well. If you break one of the precepts, then go to a teacher and confess that you broke a precept and say that you're going to try to do better. You're going to vow to not break those precepts again. And then when you break them again, you go and you confess again and you recommit again. So that's our practice. Our practice is you don't expect to become perfect instantaneously, but rather you make the commitment and you keep trying to stick to your commitment. And you keep recommitting and recommitting and recommitting. And of course you make mistakes along the way. Until you become fully awakened, you're going to keep making mistakes. That's normal. The problem isn't making mistakes. The problem is if we make a mistake and we don't learn anything from it. The problem is if we make a mistake and then we just keep making the same mistake over and over again and we never try to fix the problem. But if you make a mistake and you're like, oops, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to try not to do that again. Well, that's how you make progress. Or even if you keep making the same mistake, but you're like, wow, okay, there's a pattern here. I really need to do something about this pattern. Maybe tomorrow. Well, at least you have the intention to do something about it. At least you have the wisdom to know that you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. And at least you have the intention that at some point you're going to change your behavior. So that's the conditions which will eventually lead to you changing. So yeah, just keep recommitting, redetermining. The other thing also is to appreciate the progress you've already made. If you can keep at least one of the precepts firmly, well, appreciate that. How are you doing on killing things? Doing pretty good on not killing anything? Great. Appreciate the fact that you're not killing anything. Stealing? Are you doing pretty good with not stealing things? Great. Appreciate that you're not stealing things. Are you not cheating on your partner? I hope so. So, great. Appreciate that you're not cheating on your partner. Usually the precepts that people get a little caught up on are numbers 4 and 5. So people like to tell lies and they like to drink alcohol. So those are usually where people try to find excuses, but there are no excuses. You know what you're doing. So recognize your mistake and keep recommitting and trying to do better. Paul says, in a monastery, we culturally understand the meditator. But when I wish to practice at work, I can easily be misunderstood when focusing sincerely and keeping quiet. Yeah, that's because when you're around other people, you actually do need to make some effort to be friendly and at least minimally interactive. You don't necessarily need to like chatter on and on for hours with people, but you do want to make some effort to have some kind of minimal friendly involvement with other people. Like, hello, how are you? Good to see you. How's the kids? Oh, lovely. Okay, I'm going back to work now. Like just some kind of a friendly interaction with people. That's part of our metta practice. So yeah, if you're at work in an office with other people, samadhi is not the right practice. It's not going to be possible to practice jhana in those conditions. You can have sort of a minimal samadhi, like a basic low-level samadhi that comes through constant mindfulness, but you're not going to get into the kind of deep samadhi that you get through meditation practice. When you're around other people, you don't expect to have deep samadhi. Instead, your practice, once again, is metta. That's the way to train the mind under those conditions. Sud asks, Bhante, what if you don't have a teacher? If you break a precept, where do you go to confess and vow? You can go to a Buddha statue. So go to a Buddha statue and bow 3 times, acknowledge your mistake and recommit. But that's actually not quite as effective. It's actually better, if possible, go to a monk, because there's something very tangible about saying it to a living, breathing, sentient being who understands what you're saying, and who, when you come in tomorrow and confess exactly the same thing, they're going to be like, you didn't learn your lesson? When you come in the next day and you confess exactly the same thing, they're going to be like, you need to work on this one. And then at some point you'll be like, okay, am I going to go in and confess the exact same thing over and over again to the same monk, or am I going to change my behavior? Change the monk? Wrong answer. I hope that's not why you know so many monks. Okay. Okay, and that's the last of the questions from online, and we've gone a bit over time, so I think we'll go ahead and end at this point, so we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.
I have a quick question about precept.